I still remember the day I first noticed Alex in our advanced literature class. I'm Ethan, a junior at Westlake University, where the campus sprawls across rolling hills and old brick buildings house classrooms that have seen generations of students come and go. At 21, I'd grown comfortable with my identity as a gay man, though I kept it relatively private in the still conservative atmosphere of our small college town. My circle of friends knew, of course, but I wasn't exactly waving rainbow flags across campus. I was just another student trying to balance academics, a part-time job at the campus bookstore, and the occasional night out with friends. Alex transferred to Westlake at the beginning of the semester. He had this effortless way about him, tall with dark wavy hair that fell just above his eyes, which were a striking shade of green that seemed to change depending on what color shirt he wore. But it wasn't just his looks that drew me to him. It was how he spoke during class discussions, thoughtful and articulate, challenging ideas without being confrontational. He played on the soccer team, was majoring in English literature like me, and had a laugh that somehow made everyone around him smile. We'd struck up a friendship over shared literary opinions and coffee after class, discussing Fitzgerald and Hemingway with the kind of passion only literature majors could understand. Our friendship developed naturally over those first few months of the semester. We'd grab lunch between classes, sometimes join the same study groups, and occasionally text about assignments or recommend books to each other. I knew he was straight. He'd mentioned an ex-girlfriend from his previous university, and I'd seen him flirting with a girl from our Victorian literature seminar. I was fine with that. I valued our friendship and wasn't looking to complicate things with unrequited feelings. Or at least, that's what I told myself whenever I caught myself staring at him a moment too long during class. Let me explain why studying together became so significant. Professor Martinez had announced a midterm paper worth 30% of our final grade, analyzing the symbolism and societal commentary in 3 works of our choosing. It was the kind of assignment that required deep focus, extensive research, and the kind of literary analysis that benefits from discussion and debate. When Alex suggested we study together, I agreed without hesitation. It made perfect sense academically. What didn't make sense was the flutter of nervousness I felt when he specifically asked if we could study in my room since his roommate was hosting a gaming marathon that weekend. "Your place is probably quieter," he'd said casually after class, adjusting the strap of his backpack over his shoulder. "My roommate Tyler is having his gaming buddies over, and it's impossible to think with all their shouting. Saturday afternoon work for you?" I nodded, perhaps too quickly. "Yeah, that works." Around 2. And just like that, it was settled. Alex would be coming to my personal space, the one place on campus where I didn't have to monitor my expressions or carefully consider my words, where framed art prints of works by David Hockney hung on the walls, and a small rainbow flag pin was stuck to my bulletin board among concert tickets and photos of friends and family. The days leading up to Saturday were filled with an embarrassing amount of cleaning and rearranging. I'm not usually a messy person, but suddenly every book on my shelf needed to be perfectly aligned, every surface dusted, and every piece of clothing properly put away. I even changed my bed sheets, though I immediately questioned why I'd done that, as if preparing for something that certainly wasn't going to happen. My roommate Jason, who knew about my attraction to Alex, raised an eyebrow as he watched me frantically tidying our shared kitchenette. "It's just studying, Ethan," he said with a knowing smirk. "Not a home inspection." "I know that," I replied defensively, scrubbing at a coffee stain that had been on the counter for weeks. "I just don't want him to think we live like slobs." Jason just laughed and grabbed his gym bag. "Well, I'll be at the gym and then meeting Sophia, so you two will have the place to yourselves. Try not to overthink everything." He paused at the door. "And Ethan, just enjoy hanging out with your friend, okay?" My room wasn't anything special, but it was undeniably mine. A twin bed pushed against one wall, covered with a navy blue comforter. Bookshelves overflowing with novels, poetry collections, and literary criticism texts. A desk by the window that overlooked a small courtyard where students often gathered to study on nice days. On the walls, besides the Hockney prints, were photos of my family back in Oregon, my high school friends, and new college memories. My guitar stood in one corner, though I rarely found time to play it anymore. A small potted plant that somehow survived my inconsistent watering schedule sat on the windowsill. It was in this space that I waited for Alex on Saturday, pretending to be casually reading when the knock finally came at my door. I took a deep breath, ran a hand through my hair, and opened the door to find him standing there in jeans and a forest green sweater that made his eyes look even more intense than usual. He was holding 2 coffee cups and had his backpack slung over one shoulder. "Hey," he said with that easy smile of his. "I brought reinforcements. 1 black coffee with a splash of cream, right?" The fact that he remembered how I took my coffee made something warm unfurl in my chest. "Perfect, thanks," I said, taking the cup and stepping aside to let him in. "Welcome to my humble abode." Alex stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room with interest. "Nice place. Definitely quieter than mine right now." He moved toward my bookshelf, scanning the titles. "Impressive collection. Oh, you have Baldwin's Giovanni's Room. I've been meaning to read that." I froze for a split second. Giovanni's Room is, of course, a classic of gay literature. I'd read it for a queer literature course the previous semester and kept it prominently displayed. "It's brilliant," I managed to say casually. "You can borrow it if you want." "Thanks, I might take you up on that." He set his coffee down on my desk and pulled out his laptop and books. "So, have you decided which works you're analyzing for Martinez's paper?" And just like that, we fell into the rhythm of studying. We sat at my desk, pulling up an extra chair so we could both see our materials. We discussed potential thesis statements, debated interpretations of various texts, and shared notes we'd taken during lectures. It was comfortable and productive, exactly what studying with a friend should be. Yet I couldn't help but be acutely aware of every time our shoulders brushed, every time he leaned closer to look at something on my laptop screen, every time he ran his hand through his hair in concentration. After about an hour and a half of solid work, Alex stretched his arms above his head, his sweater rising slightly to reveal a sliver of skin above his jeans. I quickly looked away. "I think my brain needs a break," he said. "Mind if I use your bathroom?" "Down the hall to the left," I replied, grateful for the moment alone to collect myself. This was ridiculous. We were friends studying together. Nothing more. I needed to get a grip. When Alex returned, instead of sitting back at the desk, he flopped down on my bed, leaning against the wall. "Hope you don't mind," he said, patting the space beside him. "More comfortable than those chairs. We can look at what we've got so far." I hesitated for just a moment before joining him, keeping a respectful distance between us as I sat with my back against the wall. We balanced our laptops on our legs, comparing outlines and sources. The new position was indeed more comfortable, but it also felt more intimate somehow, sitting on my bed together, our voices naturally dropping to a softer register as we talked. "So what made you choose English literature?" I asked during a lull in our academic discussion. "Most guys on the soccer team seem to go for business or sports management." Alex smiled, closing his laptop. "Stereotyping much?" he teased. "I've always loved reading. My mom's a high school English teacher, so I grew up surrounded by books." "What about you?" "Similar story, minus the teacher mom. Books were always my escape, I guess. A way to experience different lives, different worlds." I paused, wondering if I should say more, then decided to take a small risk. Also a way to find characters I could relate to when I felt different from everyone else. Alex looked at me thoughtfully. Different how? Here it was, a perfect opening to come out to him if I wanted to. But something held me back. Fear, maybe, or just the desire not to change the comfortable dynamic we had going. "Oh, I said vaguely. Just never quite felt like I fit the mold of what a guy was supposed to be like in my hometown. More interested in poetry than football, that kind of thing." He nodded slowly. "I get that. I mean, I play soccer, but I also cry at sad books and write poetry sometimes. Don't tell the team that, though." He grinned, and I laughed, relieved at how easily he'd accepted my half-truth. "Your secret's safe with me," I promised. We fell into a comfortable silence for a moment, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. I could hear students laughing somewhere outside my window, music playing faintly from another room down the hall. Alex was looking around my room again, and his eyes landed on my bulletin board, where photos and mementos were pinned haphazardly. "Is that your family?" he asked, pointing to a photo of me with my parents and younger sister at her high school graduation last year. "Yeah," I said. "My parents and my sister Emma. She's a freshman at University of Oregon now." "You look close," he observed. "We are. I was lucky that way." I hesitated, then added, "They've always been supportive, even when things were difficult." Alex turned to look at me directly then, his green eyes searching my face. "Ethan," he said slowly, Can I ask you something personal? My heart rate kicked up a notch. Sure, I said, trying to sound casual. The rainbow pin on your board, the Baldwin book? Are you gay? The question hung in the air between us. I could have deflected, could have lied, but something about the way he asked, straightforward but gentle, made me want to be honest. Yes, I said simply. I am. Is that a problem? Alex shook his head immediately. No, not at all. I just wanted to know for sure rather than assuming. Thanks for telling me. I nodded, relief washing over me. Not many people at Westlake know. I'm not hiding it exactly, but it's not always easy to share that part of yourself, he finished for me. I get it. Well, I don't get it, but I understand why you'd be selective about who you tell. Thanks, I said, genuinely touched by his response. It's not usually the first thing I tell people about myself. Well, I'm glad you told me, he said with a smile. Then he picked up his laptop again. Now, where were we with this paper? And just like that, we were back to studying, the moment of revelation seemingly having no impact on our dynamic. But something had shifted, subtly. There was a new openness between us, a layer of pretense removed. We worked for another hour, debating the merits of different literary theories and laughing about Professor Martinez's passionate tangents during lectures. Eventually, Alex closed his book with a decisive thump. I think my brain is officially fried, he announced. Want to take a real break? Maybe grab some food. I checked the time, surprised to see we'd been studying for over 3 hours. Yeah, food sounds good. The dining hall should be open. Or we could order pizza? Pizza, he said definitively. My treat since you provided the study space. We ordered a large pepperoni and continued talking while we waited for it to arrive. The conversation flowed easily from books to movies to music, discovering shared favorites and playfully arguing about differences in taste. When the pizza arrived, we cleared a space on the floor and sat cross-legged, eating straight from the box like the college students we were. So, Alex said between bites, are you seeing anyone? The question caught me off guard, and I nearly choked on my pizza. No, I managed after swallowing. Not right now. Westlake isn't exactly teeming without gay guys, at least not that I've met. He nodded thoughtfully. That must be hard. It's fine, I said with a shrug that I hoped looked more casual than it felt. I date occasionally. There's a slightly bigger scene in the next town over. What about you? Still recovering from the ex-girlfriend situation? A shadow crossed his face. Megan. Yeah, that ended about 6 months ago. It was complicated. Something in his tone made me think there was more to the story. Complicated how? If you don't mind me asking. Alex set down his pizza slice and wiped his hands on a napkin, seeming to consider his words carefully. She broke up with me because she thought I wasn't being honest with her. Or with myself, really. What do you mean? He took a deep breath. She said she felt like I was holding back, like there was a part of me I wasn't sharing with her. And she was right, in a way. He paused, looking down at his hands. I've never told anyone this, but I've always been curious, I guess. About guys. The world seemed to stop for a moment. I tried to keep my expression neutral, not wanting to spook him when he was clearly sharing something difficult. Curious like? Like I found myself attracted to certain guys before, but I never acted on it or really examined those feelings. He looked up at me, vulnerability clear in his eyes. I've always dated girls, always identified as straight, but sometimes I wonder if that's just because it's what was expected of me. I nodded slowly, my heart racing. That's completely valid, Alex. A lot of people don't fit neatly into one category or another. Yeah, I've been reading about that. Bisexuality, sexual fluidity, all that. He gave a small, self-deprecating laugh. Look at me, English major doing research to understand my own feelings. Hey, that's what we do, right? Try to make sense of the human experience through words. I smiled, trying to put him at ease. Thank you for telling me. That couldn't have been easy. It's actually a relief to say it out loud, he admitted. And I guess, I felt like you'd understand. Without judgment. Of course, I assured him. No judgment here. Just support for whatever you're figuring out. We fell silent for a moment, the weight of his confession hanging between us. I was acutely aware that we were sitting closer now than we had been when we started eating, our knees almost touching as we sat on the floor. Can I ask you something else? Alex said, his voice quieter now. Anything. When did you know that you were gay? I considered the question, wanting to give him an honest answer. I think I always knew I was different from when I was pretty young, but I didn't have the words for it until middle school, and I didn't accept it fully until high school. I paused, remembering those difficult years. It wasn't one moment of realization, more like a series of confirmations that I couldn't ignore anymore. Alex nodded, seeming to absorb this. And coming out? How was that? Scary, I admitted. Terrifying, actually. I told my sister first, then my parents. I was lucky. They were supportive, even if it took some adjustment. Friends were mostly good about it too, though I lost a few. I shrugged. It gets easier with time, being comfortable with who you are. I can't imagine having that kind of certainty, Alex said softly. About anything, really, but especially about something so fundamental. It's not always certainty, I told him. Sometimes it's just acknowledging what feels true for you in the moment and being open to that changing or evolving. He looked at me then, really looked at me, his green eyes intense and searching. You know what's weird? I feel more myself right now, talking to you about this stuff I've never said out loud before, than I have in a long time. Something shifted in the air between us. I became hyper-aware of how close we were sitting, of the soft light from my desk lamp casting shadows across his face, of how his confession had created an intimacy between us that hadn't existed before. I'm glad, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, that you feel you can be yourself with me. Alex's gaze dropped to my lips for just a moment, so briefly I might have imagined it. But then he leaned forward, just slightly, and I found myself holding my breath. Ethan, he said softly, I think the reason I wanted to study here, with you, wasn't just about the paper. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. No. He shook his head slowly. No. I think I wanted to be alone with you. To see if what I've been feeling around you is real. And what have you been feeling? I managed to ask, hardly believing this conversation was actually happening. Like I want to be closer to you. Like I notice everything about you. The way you bite your lip when you're thinking hard about something. How your eyes light up when you talk about books you love. The sound of your laugh. He took a deep breath. Like maybe the reason I've been curious about guys is because I'm attracted to one specific guy. Time seemed to suspend as we looked at each other, the implications of his words hanging in the air between us. I wanted to close the distance between us more than I'd ever wanted anything. But I also knew how important this moment was. Alex was vulnerable, exploring something new, and the last thing I wanted was to rush him or make him uncomfortable. Alex, I said carefully. I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about this. About you. But I don't want you to feel pressured or confused. This is all new for you and I'm not confused about how I feel right now, he interrupted gently. Maybe about what it means for how I identify or what happens next, but not about wanting to be closer to you. As if to prove his point, he reached out and placed his hand over mine where it rested on the floor between us. His touch was warm and surprisingly steady for someone confessing such uncertain feelings. I turned my hand over so our palms met, and our fingers intertwined naturally, as if they'd been waiting for this moment. Is this okay? He asked, his voice low. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We sat there for a long moment, just holding hands, the pizza forgotten beside us. It was such a simple touch, innocent even, but it felt monumental. A bridge between friendship and something more, between his past certainties and new possibilities. Eventually, Alex spoke again. I don't know what happens next, he admitted. I've never done this before. We don't have to figure it all out right now, I told him. We can take it slow, see where this goes. No pressure, no expectations. He smiled then, relief evident in his expression. I'd like that. He squeezed my hand gently. So what do we do now? I laughed softly. Well, technically, we still have a paper to work on. Right, the paper, he said, rolling his eyes dramatically. How romantic. The word romantic hung in the air, acknowledging what was developing between us. I felt a surge of affection for him, for his honesty, his courage in exploring these new feelings, and the trust he was placing in me to navigate this with him. We could watch a movie, I suggested. Take a real break from studying. That sounds perfect, he agreed. We moved from the floor to my bed, sitting side by side with our backs against the wall, my laptop balanced between us. We chose a film we'd both been wanting to see, and as it played, we gradually shifted closer together until our shoulders were touching. About halfway through, Alex hesitantly put his arm around me, and I leaned into him, my head resting against his shoulder. It felt surreal and perfectly natural at the same time. When the movie ended, neither of us moved right away, content in our newfound closeness. It was getting late, and I knew Alex would probably need to head back to his room soon, but I wasn't ready for this moment to end. "I should probably go," he said eventually, echoing my thoughts. "It's getting late." "Yeah," I agreed reluctantly. We untangled ourselves, and I walked him to the door. We stood facing each other, suddenly awkward again, neither sure how to say goodbye after everything that had happened. "Thank you," Alex said finally, "for listening, for understanding, for everything today. Thank you for trusting me," I replied, "and for being brave enough to explore these feelings." He smiled, then leaned forward and pressed a soft, quick kiss to my cheek. "I'll text you tomorrow. Maybe we can continue our study session?" I nodded, unable to keep the smile from spreading across my face. "I'd like that." After he left, I sat on my bed, touching my cheek where his lips had been, trying to process everything that had happened. What had started as a simple study session had turned into something I never could have anticipated. Alex, the straight classmate I'd been crushing on, wasn't as straight as either of us had thought, and whatever was developing between us now felt genuine and full of possibility. I knew there would be challenges ahead. Alex was still figuring things out, and coming to terms with bisexuality or whatever label he might eventually choose for himself was a journey that would take time. There might be confusion, uncertainty, even fear as he navigated these new waters. And there was always the risk that what felt right to him now might change as he explored further. But sitting there in my room, where the air still seemed to hold traces of our conversation, I felt hopeful. We had crossed a threshold from friendship into something more, closed the distance that had existed between us, not just physically, but emotionally. We had created a space where honesty and vulnerability were welcomed, where questions could be asked without judgment, where feelings could be explored at whatever pace felt right. The books we had been studying lay forgotten on my desk, but somehow I felt we had learned more important lessons that day, about courage, about connection, about the beautiful complexity of human emotions that don't always fit into neat categories. Whatever happened next, I knew that this day had changed us both, had opened doors to possibilities neither of us had fully allowed ourselves to imagine before. As I finally got ready for bed, I thought about how life can surprise you when you least expect it, how sometimes the most meaningful connections form when you're simply being yourself, creating a space where others feel safe to do the same. How the journey to understanding yourself and others is never really complete, but rather an ongoing exploration of hearts and minds that continues to unfold in beautiful, unexpected ways. My straight classmate had asked to study in my room, and we had indeed closed our books, but in doing so, we had opened ourselves to a new chapter neither of us could have anticipated. And whatever the next pages held, I was grateful for the story we had begun to write together. Total _char_count, 18,693.